Hey guys, tonight we slip into a version of Greece you don't usually see on postcards. You're not walking through ruins with tourists snapping selfies, but instead drifting under a moon so bright it almost feels staged, like someone hung a lantern over the whole Aegean sky. The crickets are busy rehearsing their eternal summer concert, and you somehow have found yourself following a man who hums to himself, even when there's no one around to hear. His name, Orpheus. Yes, that Orpheus. And you quickly realize something odd. He's the kind of person who can't stop singing, even when silence might be the smarter choice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening right now, drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always fascinating to see this little nighttime community stretch across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about Orpheus is that he doesn't really walk through the landscape. He glides, and every footstep has some sort of rhythm, as if he's carrying a backing track in his head that nobody else can hear. He plucks at an invisible string while crossing dusty hillsides, and the odd thing is that the rocks themselves seem to tilt toward him like they're trying to catch the vibration. You shake your head, no, that can't be real. But then again, this is myth-soaked Greece, where the boundary between reality and story is about as thin as the olive oil sheen on a flatbread. And if you've ever thought you couldn't survive without earbuds and playlists, well, you probably won't survive this little journey, because here, music isn't optional. It's the language of the world. Orpheus doesn't just make music, he is music. Picture the world he grew up in: rolling vineyards, harsh mountains cutting against the sea, temples rising with fresh marble that glows pink at sunrise. This was around the time when oral tradition was the only Spotify, and a single bard could make or break how stories lived on. Fact-check moment: historians believe that Greek bards, oidoi, were the keepers of culture, chanting epics like Homer's before they were ever written down. And Orpheus, in this legendary mold, becomes the prototype, the singer so good even the gods pause to listen. But here's the quirky bit. Some ancient sources insist Orpheus was Thracian, not strictly Greek, which means he might have been more of a cultural import. Imagine Greece borrowing its favorite frontman from the neighbors. Historians still argue whether this makes him a real person with exaggerated tales, or a stitched-together symbol of all wandering minstrels. Either way, the man is humming beside you now, and his voice carries far, curling between olive trees and bouncing off stone. The night air smells faintly of resin and pine, the kind of aroma that makes you think of incense and old temples. You tilt your head up, and there's the moon, heavy as an ancient coin. Orpheus looks at it too, and instead of reverence, he starts improvising a song, half sweet, half melancholy. His voice folds the night into something softer. You hear not just notes, but stories within the notes: sailors steering ships by the stars, lovers hiding in shadowed groves, farmers hoping for rain on stubborn soil. The trees rustle in agreement, or maybe that's just the breeze. And speaking of trees, here's your first clue about the title of this story. They don't just stand there like background extras, they lean in. You swear the cypress closest to you shivered when Orpheus hit a low note. Now, skeptics in modern times might say the ancients just had vivid imaginations, but in myth, when Orpheus sings, the natural world listens, birds hush, rivers pause, even stubborn boulders drag themselves a few inches closer. It's equal parts eerie and beautiful, and you're caught somewhere between a National Geographic documentary and a lullaby. The song shifts into something playful. Orpheus strums his lyre, though right now it's slung casually at his side, and you're reminded of that one kid in high school who always carried a guitar playing under stairwells. The difference: Orpheus doesn't have to beg people to listen. The world itself is his audience. Even the night breeze seems to sync with his rhythm, brushing against your cheek in time with the beat. There's a legend that his father was Apollo, god of music and light, while his mother was Calliope, muse of epic poetry. That explains a lot, doesn't it? Imagine being born with parents like that. You'd basically be forced into an artistic career, whether you wanted it or not. No wonder he can't stop singing. But here's the part scholars debate: was this divine family tree just a convenient way of explaining talent? Or was Orpheus so compelling that later generations couldn't accept him as merely human? You can decide as you keep walking with him through the hush of Greece's countryside. You stumble a little on loose gravel, and Orpheus chuckles mid-song, tossing you a glance that says, "Keep up." His eyes are strange, bright, but distant, like he's always half looking at another world, layered just beneath this one. The moon climbs higher, and suddenly you're not sure if you're following him or if he's leading you. The path narrows into a grove where the trees form an arch, shadow, stitching across your shoulders. You're almost certain you see one of the trunks bend closer, like someone craning their neck to eavesdrop. Orpheus doesn't notice, or maybe he does, and he simply accepts it. His humming deepens, and you realize you've stumbled onto a secret. This isn't just a man singing to himself. This is a man whose songs reshape reality note by note. And this is only the beginning. Soon you'll see just how far his voice carries through love, through loss, and yes, even through the gates of death itself. You're still following Orpheus through that moonlit grove, the trees leaning in like a nosy but polite audience, and you notice he's carrying something that looks far too delicate for the dusty path he's treading. It's his lyre, of course, the famous instrument that's practically an extra limb for him. The wood gleams as though polished by centuries of hands, though in myth this one isn't just any old instrument you'd buy at the Agora. The story goes that Hermes, god of tricks and commerce, once crafted the very first lyre out of a tortoise shell. Romantic, right, unless you were the tortoise. Orpheus's lyre is supposedly carved with whispers, ornate patterns curling along its frame, each groove telling stories of old songs long since sung. The strings catgut, if you believe the practical historians. But in the mythic version, they shimmer as though plucked from light itself, glowing faintly in the shadows. Every time Orpheus runs his fingers across them, the air thickens like honey, stretching between combs. You can almost feel the vibration in your chest, as though the instrument has bypassed your ears and gone straight to your ribcage. And here's the fun fact that sneaks in: lyres weren't just pretty props in Greek art, they were central to education. Wealthy young Athenians learned to strum and sing as part of their schooling because music was thought to shape character. Plato even warned about which musical modes could make people too wild or too soft. Imagine your school music teacher telling you, "No Dorian mode for you, Timmy, it'll make you reckless." Historians still argue whether Orpheus represents that perfect harmony of discipline and passion, or whether he's simply the mythic exaggeration of every talented bard rolled into one. The quirky tidbit. Some sources say his lyre could charm not only animals and trees, but also inanimate objects, stones, chairs, even walls. Which means if you dragged him into your apartment, your IKEA furniture might start shimmying along to his set list. Not the worst party trick. You keep walking beside him, and the night has that texture of stillness where you swear you can hear your own heartbeat. Orpheus hums, adjusts a string, plucks, hums again, like a perfectionist tuning before a show. But there's no stage, no amphitheatre, no audience of mortals, just you, the trees, and the occasional owl, swiveling its head with an expression that says, "Okay, buddy, impress me." And then he begins in earnest. The notes tumble out soft at first, as though he's coaxing the strings awake. The sound flows through the grove, sliding up bark dripping into leaves. The trees don't just stand there. You catch one birch leaning a little too far, creaking like someone shifting in their seat. The pines sway, but not with the breeze. You realize they're moving on the beat. It's unnerving and beautiful, like you've accidentally walked into a concert when nature itself bought the tickets. Orpheus closes his eyes and his lips move silently before another wave of sound bursts free. The melody is rich but not overwhelming. It's the sort of tune that fills the background of your thoughts, threading through memories you didn't expect. Suddenly you're remembering childhood afternoons, the smell of cut grass, the way sunlight flickered through blinds in summer. The music doesn't just exist, it reaches in and pulls out whatever soft corners you've tucked away. Maybe this is why the ancients swore by his powers. Music, after all, has always been more than entertainment. Even today, we pump playlists to push through workouts or cry quietly to sad songs when we need an excuse. Imagine that amplified, stripped of electronics delivered by a man who seems more conduit than human. You glance at the lyre again and think about how fragile it looks. How can such a small frame hold something so vast? You notice the delicate craftsmanship, curved arms arching upward, crossbar darkened by time, strings vibrating in a spectrum of silvers and golds. You lean closer, and for just a second you think you hear more than notes, maybe a whisper in the pluck, maybe voices carried forward and then gone, or maybe you're just sleepy, lulled by the repetition. Historians love debating where the Orpheus myth truly begins. Was he originally a shaman figure from Thrace using music to bridge worlds of the living and the dead? Or was he purely a poetic invention, a symbol of music's power in a society that valued harmony above all? No one can agree, but standing here you don't really care. The man's real enough in front of you, strings quivering in the moonlight, drawing every shadow in closer like moths to flame. Another note soars and you watch a cluster of leaves detach from a branch, swirling down in perfect spiral landing without sound. Orpheus smiles faintly as if he meant to do that. Show off. You almost clap, but then think, would clapping feel rude, like interrupting a ritual? Better to just stand there, hands in pockets, letting the music roll over you. Here's your light joke of the night. You realize you're basically the roadie in this situation. Orpheus does the singing, the enchanting, the pulling of nature into line, and you're the guy trailing behind, carrying snacks and making sure no tree tries to mob him for an autograph. Don't worry, it's a cushy gig. And so the lyre keeps ringing, patient and inevitable. This is no quick ballad. It's a weaving each note, a thread stitched into the night. The grove becomes a tapestry of sound. The moon watches, the earth hums along, and you start to understand why the story insists that Orpheus couldn't stop. For him, silence isn't rest, it's absence. Music is the only way he knows how to exist. You shift your weight, the path crunching beneath your sandals, and Orpheus tilts his head, sensing your thought. His song swells gentler now, coaxing you forward deeper into the trees. You follow without question, and in the distance you swear you hear laughter, faint and golden, carried on the breeze. The laughter lingers as you step deeper into the grove, and now the music takes on a brightness you hadn't heard before. Orpheus shifts from melancholy tones into something lighter, almost playful, and you realize he's no longer alone in his performance. From the shadows, she appears, Eurydice. Her name rolls through the air like honey, and you almost don't need an introduction. The way Orpheus's song sharpens into focus tells you everything here is the reason for the melody, the muse behind every chord. She moves with a kind of casual grace, hair spilling gold in the starlight, hands brushing against olive branches as though greeting old friends. She doesn't flinch at the leaning trees, doesn't question the notes vibrating the air. To her, this is simply what life with Orpheus means, evenings where the world itself becomes their private concert hall. And you're the awkward third wheel watching something tender unfold in real time. You catch Eurydice's laugh again, bubbling, and free the sort of sound that makes you forget for a moment that tragedy is ever a possibility. It's the laugh of someone completely at ease in love, unburdened by tomorrow. The historians among us like to drop in with footnotes here. Eurydice was often portrayed as a dryad, a nymph of the forests, which explains her effortless closeness with trees and meadows. In some accounts, she's fully mortal. In others, she's a minor deity in her own right. Scholars still argue whether this variance was the result of regional traditions or just the natural drift of myth retellings. Either way, she fits here, half ethereal, half earthly, woven into the natural world like ivy on stone. The quirky tidbit. In certain obscure versions of the myth, Orpheus and Eurydice actually married twice. The first wedding was cut short, very short, by her infamous accident with the snake, But in another telling, Orpheus was so insistent, so stubbornly devoted, that he tried to marry her again in the underworld itself. Talk about persistence. But for now tonight, they are just two figures in the grove. Orpheus strums, Eurydice sways, and the trees form a canopy overhead that might as well be a cathedral roof. The smell of olives and thyme clings to the air. Fireflies blink like lazy lanterns, and somewhere an owl hoots in the wrong key. You half expect Orpheus to stop mid-song and give it the side-eye, but he doesn't. He only looks at her. You notice the way she leans close, whispering something you can't catch. Orpheus chuckles, plucks a quick trill on the lyre, and she laughs louder. It feels almost intrusive to stand here like you're peeking through a window at a couple sharing their private joy. But you can't turn away. This is the moment myth rarely pauses on the simple happiness before the storm. Eurydice steps barefoot into the meadow where the grass bends under her toes, but springs back immediately as though grateful to be touched. She twirls, once her dress brushing against wildflowers, and Orpheus changes tempo to match her spin. His fingers blur across the strings. It's not just music, it's conversation without words. You wonder how often they've done this, how many evenings in the countryside have been spent in this dance, while gods on high looked down and maybe for once smiled. The air tastes sweeter here. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with a fragrance that's somewhere between honey and sage. This moment is so full, so luminous that you almost believe nothing bad could ever happen. You want to stay here, pressed between notes and laughter, preserved like a pressed flower in a book. And yet you feel the tug of foreknowledge. You know the myth at least in outline. You know the meadow will not always be safe, that laughter will eventually be replaced with silence. And maybe that's why this happiness feels so sharp, it's framed by what's to come. Orpheus seems to sense it too, though he doesn't falter. His song shifts into a love ballad, something slower, richer, as if to capture this night and bottle it forever. Each note seems to carve itself into the air, refusing to fade. You can almost see them like glowing embers hovering between the trees before drifting away. You glance at Eurydice, and she's watching him now, eyes, soft face tilted toward the music. The world could crumble, and she wouldn't care. Not while he plays. Not while the trees bend in approval, leaves shivering in rhythm. The entire grove is holding its breath, waiting. Here's where the reality check slides in. Ancient Greece was no stranger to tragic love stories. From Achilles and Patroclus to Pyramus and Thisbe, who basically pioneered the whole star-crossed lovers trope before Shakespeare made it trendy, the Greeks seemed almost addicted to pairing passion with disaster. Some historians argue this reflects their worldview, that joy is always fleeting, always shadowed by fate. Others say it's just a storytelling device, the easiest way to wring tears from an audience. Either way, as you watch Orpheus and Eurydice tonight, you know the pattern is about to repeat. Eurydice plucks a flower, twirling its stem between her fingers, and places it behind Orpheus's ear. He grins without missing a beat. The music swells, and for a moment even you are caught in the illusion that maybe this time the story will end differently. Maybe the snake will never appear, maybe love just this once will outlast tragedy. The night leans closer, the stars pressing against the velvet sky, and the trees hum faintly in the background. Orpheus plays, Eurydice laughs, and the world feels unbreakable. But somewhere in the grass, something stirs. Something small, sharp and inevitable. You don't see it yet, but you feel it coming, the hiss that will split the meadow in two. The meadow is still almost too still, the kind of silence that sneaks in just before something goes wrong. Orpheus strums, Eurydice laughs, and you keep thinking, maybe, just maybe, the story will veer off its rails tonight. But then you hear it, the dry rustle in the tall grass. Not the wind, not Eurydice's dress-brushing stalks. Something sinuous, something alive. She steps a little farther from him, chasing a butterfly that flickers like a candle flame. Her hand stretches out fingers, nearly brushing its wings when the sound sharpens. Hiss! It's so quick you barely have time to register. The snake, coiled in the shadows, strikes. The bite is almost invisible, just 2 tiny punctures at her ankle. Eurydice gasps, startled more than pained, but the meadow knows what's happened. The trees shiver violently, branches rattling as if in protest. Orpheus stops mid-song. The last note hangs suspended before falling like a stone. You rush closer, though you're useless here, just an observer stuck in a myth that refuses to change. Eurydice stumbles, the butterfly forgotten. She tries to steady herself, but her body is already betraying her. The venom surges cold and invisible, curling through her veins. Orpheus drops to his knees, cradling her, the lyre slipping from his hand into the grass. His voice, once so steady, cracks into frantic pleas. He calls her name, sings half-formed prayers, trying to stitch her back together with sound. But music has limits. Even divine notes can't reverse a snake's strike written into fate. Here's the sober historical fact: snakes were common in the Mediterranean, and bites were a very real threat in daily life. Shepherds, farmers, and anyone wandering the countryside lived with the possibility of stepping wrong in tall grass. Some scholars even argue Eurydice's death was originally a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile life in nature could be. But historians still argue whether her snakebite was symbolic temptation, fate, punishment, or simply a narrative device to set the stage for Orpheus's greater trials. The quirky tidbit: in certain rare versions, it wasn't a random snake at all, but the jealous machination of Aristeus, a shepherd god who pursued Eurydice. When she fled, she stepped on the serpent and sealed her fate. So in some tellings, her death isn't random, it's the messy byproduct of unwanted attention, ancient drama at its finest. But here tonight, it feels horribly simple. One moment laughter and music, the next silence and collapse. Orpheus's voice cracks as he tries to sing her back, his fingers fluttering over strings like desperate doctors over a wound. The notes are jagged raw, filled with terror rather than art. You've never heard music like this before, and you never want to again. Eurydice's breathing slows, her hand clutching at his chest before falling limp. Her golden hair spills across the meadow like a second sun gone dark. The world pauses. The trees lean in branches, trembling, as though they want to weep, but can't. You feel a pit open in your chest. This isn't just a myth anymore, it's grief so sharp it cuts into you too. Orpheus howls a sound that is less human and more wounded animal. It echoes through the grove, bouncing off the rocks, scattering birds from their nests. You swear the very ground quivers, the earth itself mourning alongside him. Time stretches strangely here. Was it seconds, minutes, hours? You don't know. All you know is that Orpheus doesn't let her go, rocking her like he can lull her awake. His tears drop onto her face, blending with the dew. He starts humming again, quieter this time, almost a lullaby. His voice is soft, trembling, like he's trying to sing her into dreams instead of back to life. And here's where the story becomes unbearable. It works, sort of. You see her lips twitch faintly, her chest rise shallowly. Maybe it's imagination, maybe it's just the breeze shifting, but for a heartbeat you believe the song might drag her back from the brink. But then it fades, the silence swallows everything whole. Eurydice is gone. The trees groan their branches, bowing low as if in grief. Somewhere in the distance a nightingale starts singing, its melody thin and pitiful compared to the power you just heard. Orpheus doesn't notice. He presses his face into her hair, whispering words you can't catch before looking upward. His eyes are wild now, no longer distant, but burning with resolve. You know what comes next. He won't accept this ending. He can't. If his songs can move trees, rocks, even gods, then he'll take his voice to the only place left, the underworld. The meadow is no longer a stage, but a doorway. The music isn't over, it's only shifting venues. But tonight you stand still in that meadow, heart pounding, watching a man who's just lost everything cradle the silence as though it's something he can fight. The snake has slithered away its role, finished, leaving only ruin behind. Orpheus rises slowly, the lyre clenched tight again, his knuckles white against the strings. His next song will be different, darker, heavier, aimed at a kingdom where no music has ever reached. And you're going with him, whether you're ready or not. You follow Orpheus out of the meadow, his shoulders hunched, his steps heavier than they should be. The lyre hangs in his grip like a weapon and a prayer all at once. You keep your distance because grief radiates from him in waves, the kind that push everyone back except the dead he longs for. The night air feels colder now, the stars less generous, and you realize he's already chosen his path. If the world above can't return Eurydice, then he'll descend to the one place no mortal dares to tread. The underworld. Orpheus doesn't hesitate. He moves as though some invisible map has unfolded in his head, each step pulling him closer to the realm of shadows. You stumble behind, crunching over gravel, brushing past gnarled trees whose trunks twist like frozen screams. The path dips coils downward, and soon the smell changes from pine and olive oil to something heavier, damp stone mixed with iron. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greeks believed the entrance to Hades was found in multiple spots across their landscape. Places like Cape Tainaron in the Peloponnese were thought to be literal gateways to the dead. Archaeologists still uncover shrines near caves that might have been used for rituals simulating this very journey. Historians still argue whether those shrines were theatrical stagecraft for priests or genuine attempts at portal hopping. But in Orpheus's story, it doesn't matter where the doorway is, his music will carve it open. He raises the lyre fingers, trembling, and plucks a single note. The sound doesn't just echo, it pierces, sliding between stones, seeping into cracks, rippling the air like heat. You watch as the ground shifts, a fissure appearing black and bottomless. Without hesitation, he steps forward. You, perhaps less courageously, follow, muttering something about regretting your life choices as the darkness swallows you whole. The descent is strange. There's no ladder, no stairs, just a slope that feels endless. Shadows stretch unnaturally, and the air grows thicker, pressing against your lungs. Orpheus plays as he walks, each note a lamp cutting through the gloom. You hear things, whispers, sighs, the flutter of wings too large to belong to birds. The underworld isn't silent. It hums with a low vibration, like a city alive at midnight, but muffled under glass. And here comes the quirky tidbit. In some ancient depictions, the ferryman Charon doesn't even need to paddle his boat when Orpheus is near. The music itself propels the vessel across the river Styx, the waters trembling into ripples that carry them forward. You can almost see it now, the way Orpheus's song persuades even rivers to help him cheat the system. You reach the bank, and sure enough, there's Charon, gaunt and hollow-eyed, leaning on his oar. Normally he'd demand a coin placed in a corpse's mouth for passage. But Orpheus doesn't drop a drachma. He plucks, strums, hums. The sound drapes over Charon like velvet, softening the furrows in his face. Slowly, almost tenderly, the ferryman nods and gestures for you both to step aboard. You do, though. You grip the edge like a nervous tourist. The boat glides across the water. The Styx isn't clear or reflective. It's thick, black, sluggish, as though it resents being disturbed. You peer into it and see shapes moving just beneath the surface, too vague to name. Orpheus doesn't look down. He keeps playing eyes forward song, threading through the mist. When the far bank approaches, the landscape sharpens, ashen fields, jagged rocks, a sky that isn't sky at all, but a lid of smoke. Shadows cluster everywhere, restless and silent. Some turn toward Orpheus as you pass, their forms flickering like candle smoke. And this is the part that chills you. They're listening. Even the dead are not immune to the pull of his voice. You realize now why he couldn't stop singing. It isn't compulsion. It's compulsion and purpose. His music is the one thing that bridges everything, mortals and gods, nature and stone, life and death. Without it, he'd be just another grieving man. With it, he's something else. Something that can march into the land of no return and expect to be heard. Finally, the gates loom ahead. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, snarls low, each head swiveling in suspicion. Its teeth glisten and the ground shakes with every step. You freeze because really who wouldn't, but Orpheus doesn't falter. He lifts his lyre and plays not fiercely but gently, a lullaby that trickles like cool water. The great beast pauses, ears twitching, one head lowers, eyes half-closing, another yawns, tongue lolling. Within moments, Cerberus curls up like an oversized puppy, tails thumping softly against the ground. You almost laugh, though the sound sticks in your throat. And then, beyond the gates, you glimpse them, Hades and Persephone on their throne of shadow and pomegranate seeds. The king of the underworld, stern and unyielding, the queen equal parts sorrow and spring. Orpheus steps forward, his music swelling. This is the moment he's been building toward, not a concert, not a performance, a plea wrapped in song asking the unaskable return, Eurydice. You stand frozen watching gods lean forward caught in the net of mortal music, and you wonder if this is madness or miracle, but either way you're too far in to turn back now. The throne room of Hades is colder than stone should ever be, the kind of chill that seeps into your marrow and refuses to leave. Torches line the cavern walls, their flames burning pale blue instead of gold, as if even fire has surrendered some warmth here. Persephone sits beside her husband, a wreath of withered flowers around her head, her gaze softer than his, but still sharp enough to slice through illusions. You feel small in their presence, but Orpheus doesn't shrink. He steps forward, lyre raised, fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of his grief. He begins to play. The sound is delicate at first, like a ripple across still water. Notes slip into the air, curling around the stone pillars, echoing against the ceiling. You brace yourself for the harshness of gods rejecting mortals, but instead the music thickens the air, pressing down until even the shadows seem to lean closer. Hades shifts, not angry, but unsettled. Persephone exhales, and for a moment her face softens into something like empathy. Here's your historical anchor. The Greeks believed music wasn't just entertainment, it was a moral force capable of shaping souls and influencing emotions. Philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato wrote of the music of the spheres, the idea that harmony wasn't just audible but the very fabric of the cosmos. Orpheus in this myth becomes the living embodiment of that idea, and historians still argue whether he was a real cult figure whose legend grew, or a metaphor for music's strange, almost divine power. But right now, none of that matters. What matters is that Orpheus pours everything into the song, love lost, desperation, and a stubborn belief that beauty can bargain with death. His voice rises low and trembling, then soaring into something almost unbearable. You feel your own eyes sting, even though you're just tagging along like an invisible spectator. Persephone touches Hades' arm. She leans closer, whispering though her words are lost under the song. Hades frowns, but not with cruelty, with conflict. His kingdom is built on permanence, the one certainty mortals can't escape. To undo death even once would be to unravel the laws he guards. And yet the song presses him, pries open even the sternest resolve. The quirky tidbit, ancient vase paintings sometimes show Orpheus surrounded by wild animals lulled into peace, a lion lying beside a lamb, a hare curled against a wolf. If he could calm beasts, why not gods? Why not the king of shadows himself? And here's the miracle: Hades speaks. His voice is deep, echoing as though the cave itself is talking. He says that Orpheus may have what he asks. Eurydice may return to the living world, but there's always a but on one condition. She must follow behind him on the long climb, back silent and unseen, and he must not look back at her until they've both stepped fully into the light above. If he turns even once, even for a heartbeat, she will be lost to him forever. The words settle heavy as stone. You feel them too, though you're not the one bound to this bargain. Orpheus nods, relief and dread colliding in his eyes. He clutches the lyre close as though it might steady him. Persephone lowers her gaze, perhaps already mourning the condition, perhaps knowing what fate has in store. The audience of shadows, the restless dead, the silent pillars all seem to hold their breath as Orpheus bows. He turns toward the path out, and you can hear the faint sound of Eurydice's footsteps behind. Light, hesitant, barely more than whispers on stone. He doesn't dare glance back. Neither do you. The journey upward begins the slope, stretching endlessly before you, mist curling like smoke. Each step is slower than the last, not from exhaustion, but from restraint. Orpheus's knuckles are white on the lyre, every note a prayer for patience. You want to tell him to hold on just a little longer, but you know speaking would only sharpen his temptation. Behind Eurydice's presence is like a shadow you can't quite see, but feel brushing at the edges of awareness. The space between them is a knife's edge, too wide, too fragile. Orpheus's breathing grows shallow, each inhale measured, each exhale trembling with fear. Historians still argue whether this moment, the condition of not looking back, was symbolic. Some say it represents the inevitability of human doubt, the weakness of trust. Others argue it's a metaphor for grief itself, the constant pull to look back, to dwell in memory rather than move forward. Whatever it means, it hangs now like a sword above Orpheus's head, and the path stretches on. The light above flickers, faintly distant but real, and you think maybe, just maybe, he'll make it. But doubt is a seed, and seeds grow in silence. You swallow the tension unbearable and realize you're holding your breath too. Orpheus's song has softened now, little more than a hum, like a thread pulling him forward. And in that hush, you can almost hear her whisper his name. The climb is brutal. Not because the slope is steep, it's not, but because every step drags the weight of temptation. Orpheus walks stiffly, his neck taut with restraint, the way you might when you know a mosquito is buzzing right behind your ear, but you're told you absolutely cannot swat at it. You keep beside him, though your eyes twitch to the shadows. You want proof too. Proof that Eurydice is really there, that she's not just an echo conjured by his desperation. Her footsteps are faint, lighter than breath, but steady. Sometimes you think you feel the cool shift of air behind you, as if her presence brushes past, but you can't be sure. Orpheus's knuckles are white on the lyre, his breathing shallow. The only sound is the soft twang of strings as he plucks a note now and then, each one a thread keeping the connection alive. The light ahead grows brighter, filtering down in thin shafts through cracks in the rock. Hope swells with every step. You imagine bursting out into daylight, the meadow waiting, Eurydice blinking in the sun, alive again. For once, maybe myth will allow a happy ending, but doubt is relentless. Here's your mainstream historical fact in Greek tragedy. Doubt and hubris, excessive pride, were constant themes. Characters often failed not because they were evil, but because they couldn't resist that final temptation, that final misstep. Think of Oedipus demanding truth even when warned it would ruin him. Think of Achilles, who knew his fate and chose it anyway. Orpheus is cut from the same cloth. He knows the stakes, yet the pull is unbearable. The quirky tidbit. Some fringe versions of the myth say Orpheus did make it out without looking back, but once in the daylight, Eurydice was snatched away by the Furies' agents of vengeance, who claimed she didn't belong among the living. These strange outliers suggest that even perfection can't cheat the underworld. The gods, it seems, always keep the upper hand. Back in the tunnel, Orpheus falters. His shoulders tighten, the distance to the surface shrinks, the brightness glows like salvation, just a few steps away. But his mind gnaws at him. What if she's not there? What if Hades tricked him? What if he's walking alone, a fool with a lyre, while his love remains forever in shadow? You can almost hear his thoughts loud as the silence itself. He takes one more step. The sunlight spills wider. The cave mouth yawns open, promising freedom. And then he stops. His head tilts ever so slightly, as though caught between resolve and collapse. You want to scream at him, Don't do it! Just a few more paces, but you can't interfere. You're only a witness. The air behind him grows heavier charged, and you know Eurydice is closer than ever, perhaps reaching out her hand toward his back. Historians still argue about the exact moment. Did he turn just before stepping into daylight, or only once he was already there? Was it impatience, love, or suspicion? The texts vary, but the result is always the same. Orpheus turns. It's so small a movement, just a flick of his head, a desperate need to see her face again, to know she's truly there. For an instant, relief floods him because she is there. Eurydice pale, but radiant, following faithfully, her eyes wide with hope. You see her too clearer than ever, and she even smiles the kind of smile that could light the entire underworld. But the rules were clear. The moment his gaze meets hers, she stiffens. Her smile falters, her outline shimmers like smoke in wind. Her fingers stretch toward him, desperate to bridge the shrinking distance, but her body is already unraveling. The shadows reclaim her, pulling at her ankles, her waist, her chest. She gasps his name, voice fragile, then she's gone. Snatched back into the depths as though she was never there. The silence afterward is suffocating. Orpheus collapses to his knees, the lyre clattering against stone. His hands claw at the earth, but there's nothing to grasp. The light of the upper world pours over him, cruel in its brightness. You feel your own chest cave in, watching him lose her twice, once to the snake, now to his own doubt. You half expect Hades's voice to boom again, to confirm the rules, to explain this as justice. But there's nothing, just silence. Persephone's pity lingers like perfume, but it's powerless here. Eurydice is gone for good. Orpheus presses his forehead to the ground, shaking, no tears left. His song doesn't rise this time. The music is crushed under the weight of grief, too vast for strings. And you standing beside him realize this is the turning point. The man who once sang to trees and rivers, who could charm lions and gods alike, has now broken himself. And nothing, not even the most beautiful music in the world, can repair what's been lost. The sun is merciless. After the dim coolness of the underworld, the daylight feels like a punishment. It glares down at Orpheus as he stumbles into the world above, alone. His shadow stretches long on the ground, but there is no second shadow following behind him, no footsteps in the grass, no laugh carried by the breeze, only silence. You follow him as he wanders aimless, the lyre dangling at his side. The strings tremble with each movement, as if aching to be played, but he doesn't lift his hands. His voice, once bright and alive, is now cracked, low and heavy. The world feels different too. Birds pause in their songs. Streams slow, listening. Even the wind seems cautious, as though it doesn't want to disturb his grief. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many myths describe grief as a force that shapes the landscape. The myth of Niobe, for example, tells of her endless weeping until the gods turned her into stone, her tears becoming a spring. Orpheus fits into this pattern. His mourning doesn't just exist inside him, it radiates outward, reshaping the very environment around him. He moves through valleys and across mountains, and everywhere he goes, music trails behind him. Not cheerful songs anymore, but laments, dirges. You don't even see him strum the lyre. It's as if the instrument plays itself, vibrating with the sorrow trapped in his chest. Villagers whisper when he passes. Shepherds lean on their staffs, unsure if they should thank him for the beauty or beg him to stop because it hurts too much. The quirky tidbit. Some ancient writers claimed that when Orpheus played in this time of despair, even the rocks cried. Not metaphorically, actually wept little droplets sliding down their jagged faces. It's absurd and oddly comforting, the idea that the earth itself sympathized with his loss. Nights are the worst. You walk beside him under skies thick with stars, and he sings not to people, not even to gods, but to Eurydice. His words drift upward, carried on thin air, as if hoping she might hear them in whatever realm she now inhabits. You lie back in the grass, sometimes listening, the melodies so soft, you feel yourself slipping into dreams even as his voice cracks with sorrow. Historians still argue whether Orpheus's wandering was meant as a literal exile or a symbolic one. Did he truly travel alone for years, avoiding all human company, or is this just a poetic way of saying grief isolates us? Either way, the effect is the same. He is apart, unmoored, a figure drifting endlessly through landscapes that feel emptier for his presence. One evening, you catch him at a riverbank. The water glimmers silver, reflecting the moon. He kneels, touching the surface with trembling fingers, as though expecting it to ripple into the underworld and return Eurydice's face. But the river offers only his reflection, hollow-eyed, exhausted, with hair falling over his face. He pulls back sharply, almost ashamed. When he finally lifts the lyre again, the song that emerges is different. It's not just mourning, it's haunted. The notes circle endlessly, refusing to resolve, as if they too are trapped between two worlds. The music clings to you, winding into your ribs until you feel a tightness in your chest that won't ease. Villagers tell stories about him now. Some say he's cursed, that anyone who listens too long will carry sorrow forever. Others say he's blessed, touched by the gods in a way no one else is, and that hearing his music even once burns itself into memory. Parents hush their children with threats. Don't follow the man with the lyre into the woods or you'll never return. But still people listen. Because how can you not? You notice something else too, the trees. At first it's subtle, a branch dipping lower, a trunk leaning ever so slightly. But as the weeks stretch into months, the woods seem alive with attention. Wherever Orpheus plays, the forest gathers. Pines tilt oaks, bend leaves rustle in sympathetic rhythm. The trees don't just stand, they listen, and you realize the tragedy has transformed him. Orpheus is no longer just a man who sings. He has become a wandering echo of loss, and the natural world itself bends to share the burden. But nothing fills the hollow where Eurydice once was. The mountains rise like silent witnesses as Orpheus trudges higher, his feet carrying him where no road guides. The air grows thinner, the wind sharper, and yet he keeps moving, the lyre still clutched in his hands like both curse and lifeline. You stay close, careful not to disturb the fragile rhythm of his grief. Here, among jagged cliffs and hidden valleys, another presence lingers. It isn't mortal. It isn't quite divine in the Olympian sense either. It's something in between. The Muses. You notice them first, in the corner of your vision, silhouettes shimmering against the rocks, their gowns flowing as if made of dawn itself. 9 sisters, daughters of Mnemosyne memory and Zeus. They are said to inspire every art, song, poetry, history, astronomy. Calliope, mother of Orpheus, in some traditions, watches with a gaze that is both proud and sorrowful. Her son has inherited the gift she carries, but it now burns in him like a wound. They don't speak aloud, their mouths don't move, yet you feel them nudging, whispering inside your skull, gentle reminders that creation often blooms from despair. It's uncomfortable, this divine intrusion, but Orpheus seems unaware. Or perhaps he feels it too and simply accepts it. After all, what else does he have left but the echoes of memory? Here's your historical fact. In classical Greece, poets often invoked the Muses at the start of epic tales, calling on them to sing through me. Homer begins both the Iliad and the Odyssey this way. The Muses weren't just inspiration, they were authority, giving legitimacy to the words that followed. By weaving Orpheus into their orbit, storytellers placed him in the same category, not just an artist, but a vessel. The quirky tidbit: some ancient cults treated the Muses as more than metaphor. Archaeological finds suggest shrines where worshippers left offerings to win favor in their own creative pursuits. Imagine trying to write a love poem and thinking, well, better bribe a muse with a slice of honey cake first. Practical divine patronage. You watch Orpheus slump against a boulder, eyes hollow, strumming absently. The notes spiral out, tumbling down the cliffs like falling water. And the sisters lean closer, unseen but present, guiding his fingers just enough to shape the chaos into something coherent. His song shifts, not less sad, but sharper, clearer, the way a cry can become a hymn. Historians still argue whether Orpheus's connection to the Muses was meant literally, was he their son, their pupil, or whether it was symbolic, a way of framing the idea that music itself is divine memory, drawn from something beyond human reach. Either way, in this moment you feel it. The cliffs echo, carrying the melody farther than any mortal voice should travel, and something strange happens. The air around you thickens with attention. Not just the trees now, but the very stones seem alert. Echoes repeat the song in fragments, like the mountain itself is humming along. You wonder if you're imagining it, but then you glance at Orpheus. He doesn't look surprised. He looks resigned, as though this is what his life has become, an endless duet with the world itself, whether he wants it or not. Night falls, and the muses glow faintly in the starlight, their outlines bending as if woven from constellations. They linger at the edges of perception, watching their brother, or perhaps their creation, pour himself into music that both sustains and destroys him. You feel a chill because you realize they're not here to save him. They're here to witness, to ensure that his sorrow becomes story song legend. They care less about his healing than about what will endure after he's gone. And Orpheus, he doesn't resist. He lets the muses have his voice, his fingers, his grief. The man is fading, and the myth is blooming. You lie back against the rock, staring at the stars overhead. The music washes over you, endless, patient, a tide that never fully recedes. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also unsettling, because you begin to wonder, when the muses choose a mortal to channel through, do they ever let him go? Or is he theirs forever, a voice singing until even the trees grow tired of listening? The forest is different now. When you and Orpheus wander down from the mountains, the trees don't just stand in their usual indifference. They lean. Pines bow ever so slightly, oaks stretch out their branches, and birches flutter their leaves as if trying to applaud without hands. It's subtle at first, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The woods are alive with attention, listening the way people do when a street performer makes them forget where they're headed. Orpheus barely notices. His songs spill out whether anyone listens or not. But the trees notice. They always notice. You catch yourself staring at a particularly old olive tree one evening. It's twisted and scarred from centuries of storms, and the trunk groans as though it's shifting closer, eager to catch every note. It should be terrifying, but instead it feels comforting, like nature itself refuses to let him sing in solitude. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks often attributed divine consciousness to trees and groves. Sacred oaks at Dodona, for example, were believed to whisper Zeus's will through the rustling of their leaves. Priests interpreted those sounds as prophecy. So the idea of trees bending to Orpheus's music wouldn't have seemed strange at all. It would have felt perfectly logical. The quirky tidbit. Some late myths claim that even inanimate things joined the chorus. Stones rolled themselves into semicircles to listen better. Rivers adjusted their courses to flow closer, and once, supposedly, a whole mountain leaned forward so abruptly that goats lost their footing. You can't decide if that's tragic or just slapstick comedy disguised as mythology. Orpheus plays endlessly now, not with the ecstatic passion he once had, but with the resigned rhythm of someone who can't stop breathing. The songs carry grief, yes, but also an odd sense of duty, like he owes the world his pain, like every branch and boulder is a confessor waiting for its turn to hear him. You feel a twinge of unease at this thought. Grief is heavy, but what happens when you spread it to every living thing around you? Historians still argue whether the image of trees bending to his voice was meant literally as magical realism or figuratively, as in his music made listeners feel so seen that even nature seemed to acknowledge him. Either way, the symbolism is clear. He is never alone because the world itself bends to bear witness. One evening you walk through a meadow lit with fireflies. Orpheus strums eyes half closed, and you swear the tall grasses sway not with the wind, but with rhythm, undulating in time or with the chords. A fox sits nearby, ears perked, not hunting, just listening. You realize you're part of the audience, too caught in the pull that everything around him feels. The irony is sharp. He wanted only Eurydice to hear him, yet now the entire world listens, except the one person he longs for. You can't help but laugh softly at the thought. Imagine trying to write a sad breakup song, only to have trees sway and stones tap along. Talk about overexposure. Even Taylor Swift never had an oak tree sobbing in harmony. Still, the forest becomes his home. Villagers whisper about glades where the trees bend unnaturally, warning their children not to wander there at dusk. But you know the truth. It's just Orpheus pouring his heart into the air and the woods bending to cradle the sound. He doesn't notice the legends forming around him. Maybe he wouldn't care if he did. All he wants is to sing and to keep Eurydice alive in melody. And so he does until every branch, every leaf, every shifting stone carries a trace of his sorrow. The world listens, whether it wants to or not. You begin to notice that people argue about Orpheus almost as much as they listen to him. Around campfires in agora marketplaces on quiet hillsides where shepherds lean on their crooks everywhere, debates sprout like weeds. Some say he was a prophet touched by divine hands, his music a glimpse of the cosmos itself. Others mutter he was a fool who wasted a second chance doomed to wander because he couldn't master his own impatience. You hear a fisherman one night, net cast into the moonlit sea, mutter to his companion, "If Hades had meant him to succeed, he would have made the path shorter." The companion shakes his head. No, he failed because he doubted. Doubt always drags men back to shadow. The two argue until dawn, never settling the matter. You smile because you realize centuries later people are still arguing the same thing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Plato himself mentions Orpheus dismissing him as cowardly for trying to fetch his wife by charm instead of bravery. Meanwhile, other thinkers elevated him as the founder of mystery religions, esoteric cults that promise secret wisdom about the afterlife. Which version was true? Historians still argue whether Orpheus was merely a literary character or a real cult leader whose songs morphed into myth. The quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claimed Orpheus invented writing, not just music. Imagine that not only the man who made trees lean and stones weep, but also the one who handed humanity its alphabet. If that's true, every grocery list you've ever scribbled technically traces back to him. Not the legacy he'd have chosen, but impressive nonetheless. And so the debates ripple outward. Philosophers pace marble courtyards, voices rising as they insist the story is allegory. Poets shake their heads, insisting that it's truth wrapped in song. Farmers who don't much care for allegories just mutter that if he can charm rocks, he ought to charm weeds out of their fields. Historians still argue whether Orpheus's myth was originally about love at all. Some suggest Eurydice's role was added later, grafted onto older tales about descent to the underworld. In those earlier versions, Orpheus himself may have been the central focus, the man who could cross boundaries by music alone, not for love, but for knowledge. Others argue the love story was always there, the very heart of the tragedy. No one agrees, and that's part of the magic. Orpheus refuses to be pinned down. You walk beside him as these arguments swirl in the air, invisible but ever present. He doesn't acknowledge them, how could he? To him, the music isn't theory or philosophy, it's survival. Still, you can't help but think perhaps the endless debates are proof of something greater. A myth that spawns so many interpretations lives longer than one frozen in certainty. One evening in a village square, a group gathers to listen. Some close their eyes, swaying gently, caught in the pull of his voice. Others fold their arms, skeptical, muttering that it's all a trick. And you realize Orpheus doesn't care which side they fall on. He doesn't play to prove anything. He plays because silence would crush him. You find yourself reflecting, maybe that's the point. The myth endures not because it answers questions, but because it refuses to. Was he coward or hero, lover or charlatan, divine or delusional? The answer is always yes, no, maybe all at once. And in the meantime, the trees keep leaning, the rivers keep sighing, and Orpheus keeps singing as if the world itself is another participant in the debate. You chuckle under your breath, realizing the irony. Even in sleep, people might be arguing over this. Imagine dozing off and dreaming of two philosophers bickering endlessly about whether Orpheus turned his head because of impatience or because of love. The perfect lullaby for insomniacs who enjoy a little academic banter. The sound of Orpheus doesn't fade with Greece alone. You find yourself drifting forward in time as though his music has slipped a thread around you and tugged you gently into another age. The columns are taller now, cleaner, carved in Roman marble. The streets are broader, filled with chatter and sandals striking stone. And yet there he is again, not in flesh, but in memory, retold and reshaped by another empire. In Rome, Orpheus becomes more than a singer. He becomes a symbol. Poets like Virgil and Ovid seize his tale, polishing it into verse that slips easily off the tongue of schoolchildren and senators alike. You hear Ovid's metamorphoses whispered in a shaded portico. Orpheus, the man who nearly conquered death with nothing but song undone by his own glance. It's beautiful, polished, the kind of story that slides neatly into the Roman taste for order, tragedy, and spectacle. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mosaics of Orpheus have been found in Roman villas, showing him seated with his lyre animals clustered peacefully around him. Lions and deer, wolves and lambs all lying together as if lulled into truce. To the Romans, he wasn't just a tragic lover, he was a civilizing force, the power of art to tame even the wildest of instincts. The quirky tidbit. Some of these mosaics weren't in grand palaces, but in dining rooms. Imagine reclining on a couch nibbling olives and glancing down to see a floor decorated with Orpheus strumming away while lions snooze at his feet. Nothing like a little mythological mood lighting while you sip your wine. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly embraced Orpheus as a religious figure or just as a fashionable image. Some scholars insist he was absorbed into the Orphic mysteries, a set of mystical beliefs about the soul and the afterlife promising purification and rebirth. Others argue he was little more than a decorative motif, a pretty picture for the elite to flaunt while discussing philosophy between bites of roasted boar. You stroll through a marble hall, frescoes on the walls, and hear snippets of conversation. A philosopher insists that Orpheus represents the eternal struggle between desire and discipline. A matron counters that he's simply a warning about curiosity. Never look back lest you lose what you love. A young poet grins and claims he's just the greatest love story ever told. The debate circles endlessly, echoing those you overheard back in Greece. The myth has legs and it keeps running. What fascinates you most, though, is how his image morphs. In Greece, he was a fragile, grieving man. In Rome, he becomes something steadier, almost serene, a harmonizer of chaos. You walk into a garden where a statue of him stands among roses, lyre in hand, head tilted slightly as if listening to the air. Even in cold marble, he feels alive, his story humming beneath the surface. And yet the tragedy lingers. Every retelling keeps Eurydice close by, always just out of reach, the eternal absence that defines him. Romans loved spectacle, yes, but they also loved order, and Orpheus's failure was the perfect reminder. Even the most gifted mortal cannot bend the rules of death forever. You catch yourself smiling at the irony, a man remembered across centuries, not for what he achieved, but for the one mistake that undid everything. If Orpheus had simply kept walking, maybe he'd have faded into obscurity, his tale too neat, too successful to last. But failure, that echoes. As you leave the Roman halls, you glance back at one last mosaic. Orpheus sits in the center, the animals wrapped, the trees leaning, even the stones gathered close. And you realize the Romans, whether or not they believed in him, understood one thing: his song was never really about triumph. It was about the way loss itself becomes art, shaping how the world remembers us. The centuries roll forward, and the marble columns crumble into ruins. You feel the world grow quieter, cloistered. Stone halls give way to candlelit monasteries where the air smells of wax and parchment. It's the Middle Ages now, and Orpheus has followed you here too, not with his lyre, but in whispers, manuscripts, and coloured glass that glimmers in narrow church windows. You slip into a monastery scriptorium where monks bend over desks, quills, scratching across vellum. Their chants murmur in the background, low and steady, a drone that fills the silence. On one desk, a page glows with bright inks, reds, blues, golds. There among saints and allegories you see Orpheus drawn with almost childlike lines, a man with a harp, surrounded by animals who sit politely as though attending mass. Here's your mainstream historical fact: medieval Europe didn't abandon Orpheus. His story was reinterpreted through Christian lenses, often presented as a cautionary tale about obedience and faith. In some texts, he even stood as a symbol of Christ descending into the underworld to rescue souls, though unlike Christ, Orpheus failed. That failure was the reminder only divine love, not human longing, could conquer death. The quirky tidbit. In some manuscripts, Orpheus was depicted not with a lyre, but with what looked suspiciously like a medieval fiddle or even a bagpipe. Apparently, artists weren't always concerned with historical accuracy. Sometimes they just drew the instrument familiar to them. Imagine Orpheus piping away on a bagpipe while trees sway in sorrow. Not quite the same tragic glamour. Historians still argue whether medieval audiences saw Orpheus as myth allegory or morality tale. Was he taught as part of the classical heritage preserved in monasteries, or was he reshaped entirely for sermons and lessons? Some believe the church tolerated him as a pagan prefiguration of Christ, while others insist he was sanitized simply because the story was too good to let go. You wander into a chapel where colored light spills across stone. A stained glass window glows Orpheus in flowing robes strumming a harp, while animals crouch in awe. The monks who pass beneath likely never doubted the moral art is divine when it points upward, dangerous when it turns inward. Yet the beauty of the glass betrays something else: fascination, even admiration, for the man who sang to trees. At night you hear the monks humming plainchant in the echoing nave. The tones are simple, hypnotic, designed to erase individuality in favor of unity. You imagine Orpheus here, and it almost fits: a solitary voice threading through shadow-lifting sound into vaulted arches until the stone itself seems to breathe. You close your eyes, lulled by the resonance, and almost forget the sorrow at the root of his story. But the monks don't forget. They whisper his name in margins, tuck his story into manuscripts, reshaping him to fit their world. For them, Orpheus is both warning and wonder, a mortal who reached too far, but who proved the extraordinary pull of song. And so his legend lives on, not in theatres now, but in cloisters, carried by the steady scratch of quills and the glow of candlelight. You chuckle softly, thinking how strange it is the man who once bent gods and forests is now depicted on monastery walls, staring down at sleepy novices who probably hum his tune under their breath during chores. History has a way of transforming rebels into study material. Still the song survives, even here, even now. The monasteries fade, their chants replaced by bustling cities, velvet curtains, and candlelit stages. You drift into the Renaissance, then the Baroque, then forward still centuries, unfolding in crescendos and diminuendos, as though the world itself is performing a symphony. And through it all, Orpheus keeps appearing again and again, his lyre reborn in violins, organs, and even electric guitars much later on. In Venice, you sit in a theatre as Monteverdi's L'Orfeo unfolds the first great opera, staged in 1607. The audience leans forward, captivated, as singers give voice to grief in harmonies that soar and ache. Orpheus strides the stage in embroidered costume. Eurydice dances briefly in the light, and the descent into Hades is rendered with trumpets and choirs that shake the floorboards. It's not myth told quietly now, but myth amplified broadcast to every ear in the hall. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Monteverdi's L'Orfeo is considered the first masterpiece of opera, cementing Orpheus as a foundational figure in Western music. His story wasn't just retold, it shaped the very form of staged musical drama for centuries to come. The quirky tidbit. In some early productions, Eurydice didn't vanish forever. Instead, the opera gave Orpheus a happier ending, sometimes with divine intervention, saving him at the last minute. Apparently, not every audience wanted to leave the theatre depressed. Tragic myth, yes, but with the option of a feel-good remix. Historians still argue whether these artistic liberties honored the myth or betrayed it. Was Orpheus meant to be eternally tragic, his failure the essential lesson, or was reshaping his ending proof that music itself could rewrite fate, even if only on stage? The debate plays out in scholarly articles, but you see the truth in the faces around you. They weep at his loss, they cheer at his salvation, they hum the melodies long after the curtain falls. Either way, the myth thrives. You drift forward again, centuries, tumbling like notes in a score. In Vienna, you hear symphonies weave Orphic themes into sweeping orchestrations. In Paris, romantic poets sigh over him ink-stained fingers, sketching Eurydice's name in notebooks. And in smoky clubs of the 20th century, you catch fragments of his story, reshaped into rock ballads and folk songs. Orpheus becomes a man with a guitar, singing not to gods but to crowded bars, begging for lost love to return in 3 verses and a chorus. It's oddly funny you lean against a jukebox one evening, listening to a track that borrows the myth, and you realize Orpheus is everywhere. Every sad love song, every breakup album, every don't look back lyric has his fingerprints on it. He's the patron saint of heartbreak playlists. And the trees. They're still listening. Only now they're telephone poles swaying to the beat, or city parks where buskers strum guitars while pigeons cock their heads in curiosity. The stage has changed, but the audience remains eternal. You smirk at the thought. Imagine telling Orpheus centuries ago that one day his story would be blasted through amplifiers accompanied by drums with teenagers in leather jackets shouting along. He'd probably faint on the spot, or maybe he'd grin and start tuning his lyre to match the beat. What matters is that his voice never faded. From opera to symphony, from chant to rock ballad, every age found a new way to let him sing again. Each retelling bent the myth, reshaped it, polished or dirtied it, but none could silence him. And in the end, the music always returned to its simplest truth: a man loved, he lost, and he sang so that even the trees leaned closer. And now here you are in the present, no marble columns, no candlelit operas, no monks chanting in stone halls, just you, a quiet night, maybe a fan humming in the background, and outside your window, a tree swaying gently in the dark. And the question lingers, why couldn't Orpheus stop singing to the trees? You step into a modern forest, sneakers crunching on damp leaves, and the story follows you. Every rustle in the branches sounds like applause. Every gust of wind feels like the hush before a verse. Orpheus doesn't vanish with history. He lingers hidden in the rustling of oaks and the whisper of pines. When you walk under the canopy, you almost hear him plucking invisible strings that vibrate between your ribs. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Orpheus's myth is still studied in classrooms today, dissected in literature, philosophy, and music courses. He remains a staple in Western culture, appearing in everything from novels to films, always reshaped, always retold. The quirky tidbit botanists once noted that certain trees literally sing when wind passes through cavities in their trunks, producing tones that sound eerily like flutes or harps. Imagine Orpheus walking past such a grove, smiling, knowingly convinced the forest was answering him back. Historians still argue whether Orpheus was ever based on a real person, perhaps a legendary bard whose story was embellished, or whether he was always a purely mythic figure. Some say he represents the human attempt to wrestle meaning from grief. Others suggest he's simply the embodiment of music itself, a story invented to explain why melodies feel immortal. You stand among the trees and the debate doesn't matter much, because the effect is the same. You listen and you feel the weight of centuries in a single rustle of leaves. The trees don't judge, don't interrupt, don't argue. They just sway patient, as though they've been waiting for this song all along. Maybe Orpheus sang to them because they were the only audience that never left him. People disappointed him. Gods denied him. Eurydice slipped away, but the trees leaned closer every time. You smile at the thought even now when someone hums on a walk, strums a guitar on a porch, or lets music drift from their headphones into a quiet park. The trees are still the same audience, still leaning in, still remembering. And maybe that's the point. Orpheus couldn't stop singing to the trees because the trees never stopped listening, and neither in some quiet way have you. So now, as the story folds into silence, you let your shoulders soften. The forest you've been walking through grows dimmer, the branches above shifting slowly, lazily, as though they too are ready for sleep. The last notes of Orpheus's lyre fade into the distance, not gone, just resting, like a record player, paused mid-song, waiting for morning. Your breath slows. Each inhale feels like drawing in the hush of pine needles, each exhale like letting go of centuries of wandering. The trees around you are steady companions, their trunks anchoring you to the ground, their roots deep and unmoving, their leaves whispering lullabies in a language older than words. You picture Orpheus himself finally setting down his instrument, finally stepping into stillness. The tragedy, the longing, the endless song gently folded away like parchment in a library safe, preserved but no longer heavy on your shoulders. The forest quiets further. You notice the way moonlight softens the path, silver spreading across the ground like a calm tide. Even the night air feels slower, cooler, almost protective. Your mind drifts. You let it wander as lightly as a moth through shadow. No urgency now, no need to chase or to hold on. Just a gradual fading into softness, the kind of silence that cradles you instead of pressing down. And as the last threads of the tale unravel, you feel not loss but comfort, because the song was never about endings. It was about listening, about being heard, about the way even trees can carry a melody into the future. So rest now. Let the forest close gently around you. The story is still there if you ever want to hear it again. But for tonight, it's enough.